Welcome to Where the Music Never Dies, a space devoted to the stories, spirit, and legacy of my brother, Joel William Moss, lovingly known by many as Joe-Willy or Jolie, or just Joel. For more than 15 years, podcasting has been my way of connecting with people through storytelling. This time, the storytelling is personal. I choose this format because I need to walk through my own grief journey. And I know that hearing the memories, reflections, and truths shared by those who knew Joel will help me piece together the fuller picture of his extraordinary life. As the host, I'm giving myself permission to dive deep, to ask the questions I never thought I needed to ask, to fill in the gaps, and gather the stories that will carry me forward. Joel was never driven by fame, even though he worked alongside people who are household names. One of those individuals is my guest today, Marc Shaiman, who is an American composer and lyricist. Per Wikipedia, he is widely known for his collaborations with Billy Crystal and the late Rob Reiner, both of whom my brother worked with as well. Currently, Marc is releasing his book, Never Mind the Happy, Showbiz Stories from a Sore Winner, Not a Loser. In October of this year, Marc and his partner joined us as we celebrated Joel's life at Cafe Lena in Saratoga Springs with a vibrant second line parade led by New Orleans musician Glenn David Andrews. The whole city came out, and the city will never forget that day. Joel's presence is woven into the fabric of that community, and this series is one more way to keep his light shining. So today we bring you story number 2. Marc will share his Joel stories, filling me in on a side of my brother that maybe I know nothing about. Joel was a storyteller, and he died telling a story. Now we get to hear about him. Welcome, Marc Shaiman. And I just have to add here, your name probably was the only name that Joel just let roll off his lips when he talked about what he was doing in the industry. And I remember one day I said, I never heard of this guy. And Joel said, well, then you're living under a rock. And then I realized, oh my gosh, almost every movie I love, you've been involved in. So go ahead, tell me your stories.
Well, let me ask you, is that true what you just said that he died telling a story? Did you mean that
No,
existentially or?
that day, just so, in case people don't know, he got up that morning, went to the gym with his daughter, worked all day long. I think he had 3 projects he was working on. And he and his wife had plans to go out to dinner with 2 other couples. And they chose a restaurant, ironically, like 30 miles outside of Saratoga Springs. And they were sitting there having dinner, and Joel was doing his usual, telling his Joel stories. And Terry Lynn was sort of rolling her eyes like, I've heard this before, I don't need to hear it again. But then all of a sudden, there was nothing. No voice, nothing. And then she noticed that his head hit her shoulder. And that's how my brother went out of life.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I guess that's the way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, we know we don't want him to have gone, but I guess that's the way we'd all like to just be right in the middle of a story that your spouse is rolling their eyes out about, and then you're done. I mean, no, I mean, obviously that's not true. You would like
But,
for him to have
but
obviously have had decades more and time for us all to maybe have let him know, one last time how he felt about him.
now you knew him for a long time, at least from what I have gathered so far in all my notes. And yet, Joel was really a private person. Like I said, we we as a family didn't know what he was ever working on until afterwards, and he just might say, "Oh, have you seen this movie?" Or I suggest you go see this movie, and we go, "Why?" And he'd go, "Well, I worked on it," and that was it. Uh,
Really?
you know, and so he was a humble guy, but yet he was a storyteller.
I can't remember. I mean, it's ironic for someone who has a memoir about to be published to say I can't remember anything. The stories I tell in my book, they are those kind of those ones that I guess, once again, like your spouse will roll their eyes at. Oh, that one again. So I guess from repeating, those are the ones I remember enough to write. And yet there's so much. And so like, and also just the way that like, you have your best friends and you can't remember where you met.
Yep.
It's the same thing here. I don't remember how we met. Someone must have just suggested um, calling Joel to engineer because I just did my homework right as you were talking because I've always been bad at homework, and today was no different. So the first one I do remember was City Slickers.
Yep.
Well, no, here's one. Oh, scenes from a mall. That might have no. That was after City Slickers. Oh, look at all these movies that he worked on. My God. But for me, yeah, City Slickers was the first. And I was just figuring out how to do what I was doing. I mean, I was thrown into film scoring just in the deep end. It fell in my lap, and then suddenly there I was. Uh, I'm just going through his IMDb here. There's so many movies. Oh my God. City Slickers, there we go. And then and then of course Sister Act. But City Slickers, I remember I was writing, it was just the beginning of when like a piano could be hooked up to a computer.
Okay.
And I liked having a piano under my fingers. I've never, even to this day, can really write or create well on a keyboard, even though they've now made them like, they weight the keys and it can sound and feel almost like a piano. But I just have to have that warm body underneath me of the
I'm,
piano. And I do remember late nights as we were mixing that I was still writing this big animated opening of the movie. And so while Joe was in the one room editing, they had set up this piano in my computer in another room, and I was creating this animated thing. And I do actually remember that night I think it's the only time I've ever had to do it. I used the shower at the recording studio. I think it was the Village Recorder. They have a shower there for the true, real all-nighters.
yep.
But there were no towels, and I just that's the memory that just came to me that I had to hideously dry myself off with like horrible little brown paper towels that are like on a counter. Yeah, wow, it's all coming back to me now. Um, and I also remember that became a kind of legendary session, the animated opening, because I was so inexperienced that we had to record it like measure by measure almost, because I hadn't figured out yet how to write music that could be played quickly by an orchestra. And so Joe was part of a session that some have told me went past midnight, literally went to like 1 or 1:30 in the morning, which is hideous to think of how much I cost that movie studio. Oh my God. But Joe was there with me. And if you listen to City Slickers, it's one of my favorite scores I still ever got to do. And man, when we hit those like big Western Vista moments, the orchestra just sounds so glorious. I have another memory that just popped into my head of the the director, Ron Underwood, was sitting in front of the mixing booth in the engineered booth.
Yep.
And when we got to this one spot where the theme is just really getting played slowly and majestically for the first time, I remember Ron standing up because we couldn't see him. He was below. He just stood up and turned around to us with this huge smile that he has. And that's a big memory that sticks in my head, just looking at me and Joel of just that. It just sounded like what we all fantasize a movie score we're getting to work on would sound like.
You know,
Then,
I,
yeah,
I've heard
interrupt
other.
me at any time because you'll
That's
notice once I
okay.
start talking, I don't stop.
Yeah, that's okay because I've heard many people talk about how Joel, as a sound engineer, self-taught. Okay, he was not trained at all in that area. He taught himself, and how he would have a vision of what instruments needed to be brought in for
Right.
his music. Um, I know when he did um, my son's first recording, you know, my son said, "Oh, just, the music in the background and I'll sing." And he did. And Joel said, "Well, that's great. But now we're going to try this." And he brought in an orchestra. And there's my son who is like 18 years old at the time, like, "I'm not a star. What are you doing?" And he goes, "If I'm going to record this, we're going to have the right sound." And
Right.
sounds like that was going on in that session. And then to have somebody just stand up and smile, and it's right.
Yeah.
How phenomenal.
And those images get burned into your brain. I can just see it right now, right in front of me, as if it was happening right now. Yeah, I
So
didn't know that about Joel, or as I've mentioned, maybe I knew and have forgotten that he was self-taught or exactly how he got into it. But he was certainly scoring movies, I know, with Miles Goodman
yes,
a lot before I hooked up with him. Um, and then,
Miles was his buddy.
yeah, yeah,
Miles
yeah,
helped open a lot of doors for him.
yeah. That was, of course, devastating when Miles died so suddenly, so young. Just crazy.
So you
Uh,
worked on City Slickers with one of my favorite actors, Billy Crystal. I feel like Billy is part of my family because when Joel was working on that, hopefully you got some of my mother's chocolate chip cookies that she baked for the cast and crew.
I'm sure I did. I've eaten so many chocolate chip cookies over the years. You'll pardon me if I don't
that,
specifically
that's
remember your mom's,
but
but I'm
those
sure I
are
ate them.
those are pictures that he sent to us. It's the first time he ever took pictures on site and would send them to us and say, just in case you're interested. And then my mother said, "Well, I'm going to send them chocolate chip cookies." And she did for weeks on end. So um, that's a great memory for me. So,
And yeah, and then next was another great comedic superstar. We went to work on Sister Act. And that is the one that sticks in my mind the most, and the one that I mentioned the night of Joel's celebration. It was me, and I brought in a fabulous guitar player arranger named Jimmy Vivino, who was Conan O'Brien's guitar player and then band leader for, decades, and is one of the all-time great musicians. Also, one of the funniest guys on earth. And between me and Jimmy and Joel, oh my God, we laughed till we were sick. If you asked me like when did you laugh the most in your life, I'd probably say during the all-nighter sessions of mixing Sister Act. But I also remember how Joel was, you know, so jovial and fun until it was time to work. And then those glasses would go on, those like old man glasses, old man spectacles, and then all kidding, all joking was put aside for for those few hours of that intense work of recording an orchestra. But the mixing, that's when we could just relax. And although it may take us through the night, we just had so much fun. And that this was back in the early days. It was before really digital. But they had just started having this one box that was on the rack of all the equipment where you could sort of tune a person, but you had to like do it like in the moment. There was no visual. There was no, oh, let's try this. Let's try that. Is that all right? And Whoopi is phenomenal, but she had never really sung much at all. So I would get her to, relax and not worry about how she was sounding or anything. I was like, just we would record endless amount of takes, and that's normal where you would edit together, the best of takes, comping it's called, COMP, which is why one night I wrote lyrics to Making Whoopi. I said, we're comping Whoopi. Is that uh, uh, a word from one, tracks, one, two, a word from one, a note from two. Is that a note? Was that a moo? We're comping Whoopi. Anyway, we laughed and we laughed and we laughed. And every now and then, if she needed a little help in the pitch department, there was this little button on this little machine, and you just would just dial it to what you thought was right just in the moment. It was just the smallest little dial. It wasn't even like there was a big thing where you could look at the notches. And oh my God, we spent hours upon hours perfecting it until we got it. But all's well that ends well.
Yes.
But yeah, and then Tommy, also the second engineer there at Signet Sound, we just laughed and laughed and laughed.
So you met Joel, you said, in your early days in the industry.
Quite, yes.
What got you into the industry? What drew you? Because I know what drew him. He was an architectural student. He was on a 5-year program. And just weeks before his graduation, and I'm so glad he's not around to hear this because he probably would, beat me up being his little sister. But just weeks before graduation, he packed up his Volkswagen and drove west, did not graduate after 5 years of architectural school.
Wow.
And decided that he wanted to be in the music industry. And he had always been in music groups when we were growing up, but none of us saw this coming. It was like,
wow. Yeah, I was about to ask you
my parents were very upset with him. Very upset with him. It was like, we just put you through 5 years of college.
Wow.
Go be an architect and make money. But instead, my father had some connections out on the West Coast, and he gave them names, and he went out there and knocked on doors and told people he could do what he had no idea how to do it, but he was determined he would learn.
Wow.
So what took you into the industry?
That's just such an amazing story you just told me. I can't believe it. I at least always knew what I was going to do. And it was clear to everyone, including myself, mostly once I hit junior high school and musical theater started becoming a part of things, whether it was kids in junior high and high school putting on shows, or then community theater. I fell into the world of community theater. And even though I was 13 or 14 years old, I became musical director to all these adults because I just had this talent for, playing piano and showbiz. I understood how to play it and how to teach it. And so once musical theater came into my life, my schoolwork went out the window. But my love of music and all that, and my determination just was so clear that when I told my parents I was going to take the state equivalency diploma and the GED, often referred to as the good enough diploma, I took it when I was 15. I found out I passed, and so I stopped going to school basically for the last few months of my 10th grade. And then in October of my 11th grade year, it was my 16th birthday, and that was the last day I went to school of any kind. And I got to make a long story short. I moved to New York that summer. By chance, I met some people literally on the street who hired me. It's such a long story. You'll have to buy the book for that about how I started getting jobs in New York. Right away, I ran into some friends. We said, hey, let's go into this place right here in the corner and just catch up. And that place happened to be a piano bar. So there was a piano. I was 16 years old. Of course, I went right to and started playing. And the bartender stopped sweeping and said, hey, kid, you're good. And that led to me suddenly in that one day getting 2 jobs, including playing at that piano bar. And the other job, one of the persons was Scott Whitman, who ended up becoming a life partner for 25 years, and my co-lyricist. He lived across the hall from one of Bette Midler's backup singers. I idolized Bette Midler. That's all my dream was someday I would somehow get to work with Bette Midler. So there was one of her backup singers across the hall. I would end up staying with Scott on the weekends to play for his comedy act. And Bette's backup singers decided to do an act on their own. And then it became a success. And then Bette said, girls, come back on the road with me and I'll let you open my show. And so I was flown out to LA to teach Bette's band, the Harlettes music. The Harlettes are Bette's backup girls. And that's how I met Bette Midler and immediately fell into working with her. And I still hadn't even turned 18. I was barely 17 at that point, I think. So my ultimate dream came true right away. Anyway, I didn't make the long story. Well, I did make it shorter, but sorry. And then through other work in New York, I started working at Saturday Night Live. They would call me freelance to come up when they needed a funny Jewish piano player, because it's a law of show business that if you're doing comedy, you need a funny Jewish piano player. And they didn't have one at that time. Paul Schaefer had just left the show a few years earlier. So I was lucky enough to start getting those calls, and that's where I met Billy Crystal and Martin Short and Christopher Guest. And my relationship with Billy immediately turned into working with him. He went on the road as a comedian, and this was on the big success he had on Saturday Night Live. And I played under his act. He would do some songs here and there funny, and then I would underscore some of his monologues. And then he started filming When Harry Met Sally, and he asked Rob Reiner, what do you think of doing for the music? And Rob Reiner said, I need a guy who knows every song that was ever written of the Great American Songbook. And Billy was, the mensch of all times, and said, have I got the guy for you? So, and then Bette Midler's movie career took off. And so I was suddenly, once again, making a lot of long story shorts, I was working on When Harry Met Sally and Beaches. And both of those movies became huge successes. The soundtrack albums became huge successes. And this life that I hadn't really ever seen for myself of film scoring. I mean, I loved film and music, but I was a Broadway kind of guy. But then suddenly film music just fell in my lap. And then it was off to the races. And I had a few years of unbelievable luck where it was just one iconic mega movie after another. And Joel was a part of almost all of those movies. City Slickers, Sister Act, A Few Good Men. Here, let me once again go to my notes here. Mr. Saturday Night was a movie we did with Billy Crystal that we loved very much. Another movie that you never heard of called Heart and Souls. It's so sweet, such a wonderful movie where we really got to do a big, old school kind of movie score. So on and so forth. So that was it. And we just were, inseparable.
So you worked with him out in LA, and then in the early 2000s, Joel sort of drifted from the West Coast and came to the East Coast and started doing some re-recordings for Broadway shows. In fact, my first guest on the show was Kim Scharnberg, who was so gracious, and he said he was so excited to be able to meet you in Saratoga Springs. So we know that you have that charm.
That's sweet.
But
hey, I just remember one more story from back in the LA days. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
This is a funny story I tell in the book. That because of When Harry Met Sally, then Joel and I started doing other albums with Harry Connick Jr. And so it was Harry Connick Jr.'s second album with big band and strings called We Are in Love. And Harry, at that time, I'm sure he still is to an extent, was a real purist. He only wanted to record like direct to vinyl, like no punching in. We would do many takes, but then pick the best take. There was no editing between takes, nothing. So Harry said to me, I'm bringing a drummer up from New Orleans. You're going to love him. Shannon. He's just the greatest. I was like, oh, okay, great. But when you arrange for a big band and strings, everything is very worked out in the arrangements. And a drummer needs to know what the brass is going to play, because if the brass is going, the drummer will hit and accentuate the biggest brass hits. Well, Shannon showed up to the session, and I found out something Harry did not tell me. Shannon did not read music. So Joel and I had to keep stopping and starting because Shannon was learning the arrangement on the spot. The brass players wanted to murder us because they had to just keep starting over and over and, blowing their brains out to the point where I had to end up standing in front of the drummer instead of on the podium. And I was dancing around like Anne Margaret on amphetamines, just trying to show Shannon where the hits are coming. Here they come. So anyway, the end of the story is we're at the mixing studio. And this was a little bit of Harry easing up a little. He actually allowed us to mix after the fact, accentuate something a little here or there, bring something up or down a little. That's all he would allow. But I'm sitting in the mixing studio just so frustrated that there aren't drum hits on some of the horn lines. So finally, I walked out of the mixing booth into the little kitchenette, just moping, and I looked into a corner, and there was a snare drum just lying, it was like leaning against the wall. And I looked around for a drumstick. There was no drumstick, so I went back in the kitchen, and I found a fork. And I walked back into the booth, and I said, Joel, set up a mic. Harry, turn your back, leave the studio. I've got to put in some snare hits. And so Joel set up the mic, and I went out, and I started with a fork on the snare, hitting bap, bap. And around a minute later, Harry came into the studio and said, oh, man, your timing stinks. Let me do that. So if you listen to the album now, I'm happy to say that even I can't tell or remember what's Shannon from the session and what is me or Harry with a fork on a snare. And that's, one must tip one's hat to Joel, the fact that he was able to EQ it and figure it out so that even I can't tell now what's what. Anyway.
It's interesting because I spent a couple different occasions in the studio with my brother. The last time I was in the studio, he was recording our son. And my son didn't want me to look at him. In fact, when I was in the studio, I had to have my back towards him. Because
right, I get it. I understand.
And Joel would record, and then he'd say, okay, we're going to do it again. They'd do it again. And then I sat in there as Joel was taking pieces from each different recording. And I kept thinking, how do you do that? That you're going to notice it. It's, his voice was high here, it was low here. And when I finally heard it, and because I watched what he did,
right.
I said, how do you know how to do that? He said, either or
yeah.
And I've had other people say the same thing to me, that, you have to have that ear for it. You have to have that talent.
Yeah.
That's what you had, obviously, with that snare drum, too, because there had to be a little bit more of that.
It still makes me go back. So, like, as a kid and as a teenager, Joel wasn't, like, in a band or listening to records and kind of, in his way, analyzing what made it sound the way it sounded?
In our house, there was a lot of music. My parents had, their hi-fi stereo, and records would play. We would watch different variety shows with music. Joel was in choir in school. He was in the choir in the synagogue. In fact, at one point, he said he was going to be a cantor. But I think that only lasted for one high holiday season that he said that. But he taught himself how to play instruments. My parents had an accordion. One day he just picked it up and he played it. My cousin had a trumpet and he wasn't using it anymore. And my brother Joel said, can I borrow it? And he said, no, you can have it. And next thing we know, Joel's downstairs in the basement and he's Louis Armstrong. It's like, who are you? How did you learn how to do all these things? Oh, and he played clarinet as well. He had all these talents, and it's interesting. He was the middle child. My older brother Gary and I never felt jealous of him or resented any of his talents. We just absorbed them. We just loved them. You know, it was like, you want to go sing for us? Go ahead, go sing. You want to play an instrument? Um, and yet he didn't brag about it. You know, he was just Joel doing his thing and wanting others like yourself to grow along with him. And his celebration of life showed that there were many people out there that,
That was what a wonderful night that was. Oh my God.
and you came in from New York City and then turned around and went back. I mean, we totally appreciated that. I mean,
Yeah, I hated to have to leave early, but like that's a long drive, and I had something like at dawn or something I had to do, maybe even a plane ride, I forget. And then, oh, do you remember that when I got to there and walked to the park to do the walk, that a bird shit all over me?
oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, you didn't?
Oh, no.
I think I showed it to you, but you had a lot on your mind that night. Yeah, I thought, well, I guess that's Joel saying, oh, nice of you to show up. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
Well,
another great memory of that night. But it was yeah, that was just so great. The fact that you had to have both upstairs and outside going at the same time. All those people and the walk through the park with the band, that was, I mean, that, once again, what a way to go. I mean, that was really gorgeous.
and the concept of these stories that I'm doing, it's going to be ongoing for a while, but anybody who knows anything about Saratoga Springs and Cafe Lena also knows that they have a school of music. They don't have a location right now other than at the cafe. Joel was very active in their school of music as well. And I just want this to be a history for that school of music. He spent the last 20 plus years of his life devoted to Saratoga Springs. But he didn't forget all the people that he worked with along the way. And you are one of them, and that proved it for you coming in to be part of his celebration of life and entertaining us. That was wonderful. That was absolutely wonderful. So, can you give us a little snippet, as long as I've got you here, about your memoir? I cannot wait for it to come out. And how do I get a signed copy of it?
Oh, well, if I can remember between the time that I tell you right now, well, of course, and the time that we sign off and I walk into my music room, we're 10 feet away. Let's see if my memory can hold out. But feel free to email me and remind me. I mean, I'll send you one, of course. And I tell that story about the fork and the snare drum in it. It's just the long form version of all these stories I'm telling you of just, I'm entering my 50th year in show business. I turned 66 a few weeks ago. And I was listening to a podcast with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Has a great podcast called Wiser Than Me, where she talks to older women to get the wisdom of older women, and not just show business, but cooking or poetry or authors. She's a great interviewer. And Jane Fonda was on talking about her memoir, and she said that she just felt it was time for her to do a life review, and it just stuck in my head. And I think I had just gone through yet another disappointment of show business. And the idea of a life review also, my friends call me Eeyore. I'm rather pessimistic. And I think subliminally, I just wanted to say, hey, you, let me remind me of all the things that you've done and all the wonderful things you've gotten to work on, and some great successes. And just, get it all down. And, people would say to me all the time, oh, you should write a book. But they say, I hear them say that to everyone.
Right.
But it just suddenly just stuck in my head, do it. And I just sat down and I did it. And it flowed out. The hard part of writing, turns out, is editing, oh my, I mean, there are people whose names I cannot believe are not in the book at all, who are so near and dear and such a big part of my life. And yet, whatever the stories that my brain took me to, my heart or brain, somehow there are a few people there I just cannot believe now. Oh my God. Anywho, and it's called Never Mind the Happy because it's the key to my personality. Is a story that my sister called my mom one day on a New Year's Day and said, "Ma, I want to be the first to wish you a happy and healthy New Year." And my very Jewish mother said, "Never mind the happy." So that's a big key to, I guess, what's in my blood as well. Just constantly bypassing the happy and only focusing on something else. And so the book is my way of, despite the title, trying to mind the happy. And there you go.
I am just I'm excited about reading the book, but I'm even more excited to hear what others are going to say when they hear these stories of Joel. Initially, I wanted to start this months ago after he passed, but out of respect to his wife and his daughter that just weren't ready
Right.
to hear anything, I said, I will put it off.
Yeah.
And when I chose to start it here in 2026, there still is some trepidation from the family. And my comment is, this is for me. This is
Sure.
for me. Joel was my brother, will always be my brother, but I had him on this earth for 75 years. And we had our good times, our not so good times. But the one thing I know is we loved each other deeply, and that will never change. And I hear that love coming from your stories, and I want to thank you so much for sharing them.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and thank you for asking.
And have a great day. Have a happy.
Yes, I'll try.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you, Mark. We'll
Thank you,
talk
Karen.
soon. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.